Things have been studied every which way from Sunday by other organizations and institutions for fraud and fakery and all this, and it's determined. I believe that it is not, and this is where he takes over and is studying what is said in these transcripts, and it is fascinating. There isn't anyone with any more qualifications than this gentleman when it comes to the study of language or the cryptolinguist. These transcripts. You're going to like what you hear here, but you better open up your mind, because you're going to have to think about these animals a little bit differently after this presentation, because if they've got a language, then they're not animals. So we'll just let Scott take it from there.
Thank you, Randy. Is that good? Can you hear me? No. Now?
Yeah.
Better?
Yes.
Like Randy said, I'm here to present my study of the Barry Moorhead tapes, which were recorded in 1972 and 1974, commonly referred to or previously known as the Sierra Sounds. I want to start with one of the questions that I'm most frequently asked is, how long have you been a Bigfoot researcher? I have to tell you, I have never been a Bigfoot researcher, or even an enthusiast. I'm a retired Navy cryptolinguist. I was a Russian, Spanish, and Persian interpreter, trained in the techniques of voice transcription, and having logged thousands of hours listening to the human voice on tape. I have always held a passive interest in Bigfoot, having grown up in northern Utah, near the largest Native American school west of Oklahoma, by the way. And having heard many stories from my Native friends about what they call the wild man on the mountain. This was long before I ever heard the term Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I didn't put much stock in those stories because they also told me stories about shapeshifters and women that turned into birds and wolfmen. And in all my years growing up in the Rocky Mountains, I'd never seen or heard any sign of such a creature. Still, it was kind of fun to imagine him the way my friends did, as a giant and gentle, but rather scary big brother watching out for us from deep in the forest. I had seen the Patterson-Gimlin film, eventually, and all of the Boggy Creek type mysteries, but I'd also heard the arguments against Bigfoot. So I cannot say that I believed in him, but rather I believed in the possibility of him. I was quite happy with that relationship, quite satisfied with my rather mundane life as a dad and a teacher of philosophy and languages at a small Midwestern college. Well, all that changed quite by accident in February of last year, and nothing has been quite the same for me and my kids ever since. I have been launched into the bizarre world of Bigfoot research, something I never expected or desired. Early on, however, I came to accept the fact that I was probably the right guy for the job that had to be done. And so right now I'm doing what I can to contribute in any small way to the effort to have Sasquatch recognized by science. How did it all happen? Well, it was because of my son Stevie that I first scrolled up on the Sierra Sounds. It was he who was the Bigfoot enthusiast, as most 12-year-old boys are, and he needed a subject for a research paper at school. We were sitting in my classroom perusing the internet when he asked me, "Dad, what do you think Bigfoot sounds like?" And remembering a moaning howl from some 70s movie, I tried to imitate it for him. Well, he scowled at me and said, "Dad, that's not what Bigfoot sound like." And I said, "Well, let's see." So we started perusing. And I wound up on a website and scrolled up on a prompt labeled Samurai Chatter. I played it and both of our eyes lit up. I played it again, and again, and again, and again, and when Stevie couldn't stand it any longer, he nudged me and said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I said to him right then, because I knew it immediately, I said, "Stephen, that's language. They're using a language." I don't remember much about the ride home that afternoon, because my world had suddenly changed. And I was in a sort of meditative stupor, trying to work out a dozen new questions in my mind. I do remember while walking to the car, Stevie stopped me and said, "How do you know it was a language, Dad? It just sounded like a bunch of apes fighting to me." And I thought for a moment and said, "In order to prove it, we have to slow it down like Dad used to do in the Navy. Stevie, we've got to get our hands on those tapes." And thus began a new obsession for me. After that first quick review of the samplings of the Sierra sounds, there were three facts that were immediately evident to me. Number one, the vocalizations were not human, not as we currently define humans. Number two, the creatures were speaking in a complex language, by the human definition of language. And three, the tapes could not have been faked. I will give my arguments for these conclusions later in my presentation. I also walked away that day feeling that I could not have been the first person to have noticed this. There have been dozens of books written about Bigfoot, and I was certain that I would find this language discussed somewhere. So I began checking out every Bigfoot book I could find in the libraries, buying others online and clearing up the bookstores looking for the analysis of this language, but to no avail. Most of the books discussed Sasquatch vocalizations, but without one word in reference to their language or even the possibility of it. This was troubling to me, since I was also finding dozens of eyewitness reports that clearly stated that the witnesses heard the creatures speaking some sort of language. I did not understand how these recordings could have been ignored for so long. And then I found one reference to the Barrymore hit tapes in a book by Dr. Grover Krantz, who stated, quote, "The tape was analyzed by some university sound specialists who determined that a human voice could not have made them. They required a much longer vocal tract. A Sasquatch investigator later asked one of these experts if a human could imitate the sound characteristics by simply cupping his hands around his mouth. The answer was yes." He continues, "I do not know what these recordings actually represent, but given the circumstances, they do not seem to merit any further investigation." And it seems with that the matter was dropped. Well, I can tell you that whoever the sound expert was, or the Sasquatch investigator that Dr. Krantz talked to, it was a mistake to dismiss these tapes so out of hand. I realized, however, that if not for my long experience in manipulating the human voice on tape, speeding it up, slowing it down, that neither would I have recognized the articulated phonemes and language structure within these sounds. I knew then that the tapes had never been submitted to a qualified cryptolinguist trained in the recovery techniques of voice transcription. I had heard the language of Bigfoot. It was now my duty to document it, no matter how much ridicule I would suffer. And I will tell you there has been some. Anyway, I began making phone calls and writing letters to anyone I thought could help me get my hands on those tapes. I professed a lifelong dedication to the pursuit of Sasquatch, hoping that this would help my cause. And indeed, it soon paid off, with a phone call from an investigator who knew that Ron Moorhead owned a business in Mariposa. After a little more detective work, I was on the phone with Ron. And it took me a while to convince him that I was legitimate, but once I did, the tapes were on their way. That was in April of last year. Something else happened at that time. Just as I had decided that I was the first ever to discover that the creatures used language, I found out that Ron and Al had always known it, and had tried for 35 years to find someone who could verify it for them. From the start of our collaboration, they have both been adamant that the creatures were talking to each other, as well as trying to communicate to the humans present. From the beginning, Ron's persistent and earnest plea has been, can we know what they were trying to say to us? Now, I will address that question a little later, but for now, this is a good time to play some of the samplings of the tapes and demonstrate how we use the transcription program to recover the articulated phonemes of the language. I find probably the best thing to do is just to start with the Moorhead tape and just let you hear it at real time for a couple minutes here. And then we'll go back and show you how we slow it down and transcribe it and retrieve the articulations of it. And that's not human. Now in here you'll start to hear some of the voices of the cowboys. Or the mountain man, I've called them. The cowboys, what they're trying to do is they're hollering out into the forest saying, come on down, David, and have some dinner. And they're out there right now, as this is being recorded, offering the creatures a big pot of stew. And it's like the creatures are trying to decide whether or not to take them up on the offer. And then here we have what one creature starts in what we've come to term a hostility assertion. And then they start to fight a little bit, like as if they're having a disagreement over the food. What we do is we take this really split second by split second, and we isolate it like this, and we'll slow it down little by little until it becomes comprehensive to us. So I'll show you a little bit how we do that. So we've isolated it here. We're 100% here, and as we slow it down, it becomes more comprehensible to us. Nagibash. Nagibash. But we'll continue on here a little bit further and get to some interesting stuff. Now, at real time, this really does sound like what how Stevie described it. Bunches of apes fighting. I want to get here to one point where you can really hear the cowboys talking. And you'll hear the cowboys talking and then the creatures speaking at the same time. So there's no way to fake that. Not in 1974. Or in this case, 1972. And here they're talking about they have another microphone that they want to place out there, and one's trying to direct the other guy in the direction of where they think the creatures were.
What time of day is it?
So we go on.
Is this all night?
We have a total of about an hour and a half of this stuff, and it goes on and on and on. Now, I have a question here, quick.
Yeah. What time of day is this?
This is at nighttime. This is in the night. In the nighttime. I want to go back. In fact, I'll play this. This one here. You're seeing that, right? Yeah. This one here is Al Berry's tape. This one down here is the beginning of Ron Moorhead's tape, and he actually begins his. I'll play that for you.
Thursday. This is Thursday, the 26th of September 1974. We just drive in camp. It's 7:30, and we're seeing a 22-inch track on the trail, and we just heard some noises, so I'm going to try to record it.
So with Ron, he actually documents exactly what time of day and the date and all this. Al did the same thing, but he didn't do it on the tape. So, there. We come back to, well, I'll just, let's see. Classic Bigfoot vocalizations before you get into the language. Oh, you know what? I had a little magic marker written on my screen here. And when we put it up there, it moved it over, so I don't have it exactly marked. So we'll go back here to the Berry tape. And just go back and listen to some of these things. Okay, we'll just take this. Let's see, it's 2 minutes, 42 seconds into it. Ringo Onduri. Ringo Onduri. Doesn't sound like that, but each of these, you might have half of a second here of vocalizations, and it takes, to go through the whole process, it might take might take an hour, an hour and a half, a couple hours to retrieve those articulations out the way they should be. And so it doesn't always sound exactly what appears on the transcription. Yeah, we're gonna do that. Yeah. Okay, this is real. Again, this is real time. Now we're slowing it down. Orengo onduri. Orengo onduri. Okay, and the next one is, this is an interesting one here. On the transcript, I've got Malaya, and this I've begun calling, and it's an acknowledgement snarl, or an acknowledgement grunt, and a lot of their vocalizations, it's like a terminal, almost like what we would use a period for, to let the other creature know that they're done speaking. It's just a quick little exhale, and then a snarl inhale. And I've heard this in the wild 7 times at different places. In California, I've heard it in Kansas, and I've heard it in Missouri, in direct response to some of the vocalizations that I have mimicked from the transcripts. We've got good success in being out in the field in a known area and just mimicking some of the language that's on here, and simply, it's almost as if they're acknowledging you, that they understand that you're trying to communicate with them in a way, and they'll just give you one of these. It's like this, right? You'll hear it on here. Okay. Now that's we started in real time. You can actually hear the phonemes even at real time there. But when you slow it down, you can definitely hear it. And you hear the let's try some more in real time. Now here, this is interesting. This sounds like a juvenile that's chiming in. We've got a couple of them. See, there's a couple of them. Slow that down. Feel, and the young one also has this. It's different. Feel one. There's some very interesting things here right after these whistles. Again, 100% real time. It's at 22 seconds. And then this next one is interesting, and you'll notice that this is in a query inflection, the same as a human would do. It goes up at the end, like humans when we ask a question. And listen to this next, what the response is. Do Rhino. You see that this is a response inflection. The same way humans do it. We'll go on here. Okay, here's one. Falibabash. There's no reason for any creature in nature anywhere to articulate sounds like this without purpose. We know that it has meaning. Okay? And in the response, again, Falibabash. And then next. This is already slowed down. Now, many people listen to this and they say, there are some English words in there. Okay, now, one thing we have to be careful of with cognates is that, and I've experimented with this with colleagues that speak different languages or are native speakers of other languages, is that we naturally find languages that we happen to be looking for. So those of us who, I have a colleague who is a native Japanese speaker. He hears Japanese in here. Okay, I've got a call. I'm a Spanish speaker myself. There's a lot of Spanish in here when you look for it. So we have to be careful for that. I've had Native American speakers find things like that in there as well. Okay, so that's one thing we have to be careful of. Now this is a very interesting thing, because this sounds almost like a human female, even at real time. But listen to it when you slow it down. It's unmistakably language. And we go on and listen to this part. Here, I'm going to play this part. Oh, here we go. Now, this is interesting. They're saying the word food twice in the same vocalization, just one. Okay, and seemingly an answer to a query. As if he's saying, what are you doing? This other creature says the word food twice. Okay, now, to us, is it a coincidence that at this very same time, at this very moment, the cowboys are holding out a pot of stew, saying, come on down and have some dinner. Now listen to this. That's very fast. Slow down. It says, Gigo. Right before they said, Gigo, whoop, me watch food, plain food. Which is a very good pidgin for I'm watching the food and there's plenty of it. So, and again, this goes on and on. There's one other spot I want to play, and I haven't played this for a couple of people. And it's very interesting because it sounds like the creature is laughing. And we've even, Ron and I and Al have listened to this over and over and over again and come to the conclusion that it's like the big guy, the big one, that they call the old man, is making a joke and then laughing at his own joke. Which, so, now here's one, it says, right there, and I won't go back and play the whole thing of it, but he uses the word Beth, B-E-F. one creature uses the word Beth, or the morpheme, Beth. And then the other creature that in answer uses the same morpheme. One says, Bethawadi, and the other one comes back and says, Bethayulu, as if commenting back to each other about the same subject. Okay, now let me see. I'll listen to that again. It's almost like he's chuckling, but when you slow it down, you can begin to see that there's language there. While he's just as often as how we humans tell jokes, we often laugh at our own jokes. And we laugh at our own jokes while we're in the process of telling them. We think we're so funny, quite often, right? So, it's a very naturally human linguistic thing to do. Now let me just show you quickly the format by which I've transcribed these. And again, this is, we've got 75 pages total in these transcripts. And this doesn't look like, you can see here, these are the timestamps, and we did this all according to military transcription standards. Okay? Go down here, we've got a 32 set. These are military standards as far as timestamps go. 32 seconds, 0.95 into it. Plenduchtish, Sijiao Glopumech, Pachi Kodu to sex, Wahetu Chedufuhe. Here's the long where it says, "Me watch food, plenty food, no wow, no And here you see what the cowboys are saying here. Come on, boy, come on, let's eat. And then one says, now this sounds very much like a cognate. Be careful now, prosgut. Be careful now, prosgut. As if prosgut was a name. We have several instances in here where we think they are pronouncing names, calling each other by name. Prosgut is one, Pilar, and interestingly enough, on Ron Moorhead's tape, we have one that we think has called the other one Big Zoo. Just like that, Big Zoo, Big Zoo. And Big Zoo comes, and actually Big Zoo on the other one comes out and says, which is again is a very good pidgin for do you have food? It's even in a query inflection. So it's hard to deny what we have here. Okay? I'll just show you the transcription key, again, according to military standards. This is the phonetic alphabet that I've come up with, which I'm going to propose as a standardized Sasquatch alphabet for any future transcription. So that we start right from the beginning, when we start to transcribe these things and more tapes start coming in, we're doing it on a standardized basis. Okay? You can see here, okay, for the transcription, I've chosen to use a variation of the English Phonetics Reform alphabet. Certainly in the unknown language such as this must be spelled out using phonetics as opposed to the conventional spelling of sounds in English, which is notoriously non-phonetic. Etc., etc. Use the umlaut. For this reason, since this is an unknown language, transcribed for the first time, the grammar and syntax of it likewise cannot be known. Therefore, to differentiate between small and capital letters would be useless and misleading. I've chosen to transcribe the vocalizations of the creature in capital letters, only out of a sense of style, and it simply seemed to fit the sound of the voices better than small letters, and I found it easier to read while following along with the tapes. So that's really the only real reason why, when we're doing transcripts, I use only capital letters. There's a very arbitrary reason why we humans use capital letters and small letters in our writing, okay, and so on. Any questions up to this point? Maybe I tell you what.
Can you speak to the prosody so that they know what prosody is?
I'm gonna get to that. Let me go ahead and go through the rest of my little written out speech here, and it may answer some questions. Okay. I guess you can turn that off now. Am I on here again? I guess it is. Now, you've heard a small, and this was a very small sampling of the language. And now I'd like to make my arguments for the conclusions that I put forward earlier. Okay. First, the voices were not human. At least not as we currently define modern humans. Having listened to thousands of hours of the human voice on tape, I can tell you these creatures are simply making sounds that humans cannot make. Their vocal range is far too great. They produce sounds much lower and much higher than humans are capable of. Additionally, volume and resonance of many of the vocalizations they produce are beyond the ability of humans. But the most striking element to consider is the prosody of utterance, or the tempo at which each utterance is delivered. As well, the tempo at which each utterance is delivered, as well as the speed at which the conversational turns take place, with the creatures almost stepping on each other in their discourse. For the majority of the utterances, the rate of deliverance is at least twice that of humans. As you can see, when it's at real time, it does sound like apes fighting. When you slow it down, you can see that there are articulated phonemes and morphemes that have meaning, by definition. My second conclusion was that this is language. But what did I recognize in these vocalizations that told me it was language? First are the articulated phonemes so similar to our own that it must be assumed that they are produced by the same apparatus that we possess, namely the tongue, the teeth, and the lips, along with the entire tracheal tree, oral cavity, and nasal cavity. I have isolated 39 different phonemes, which you saw in the transcription key there, all common to humans. Phonemes are combined to form morphemes, which are defined as essentially little individual units of meaning, which we would normally or commonly call syllables or minimal words. Okay, these are found throughout the tapes, repeated in conversational terms and in combinations characteristic only of language. We find here, again, conversational turns of utterance, or what is called discourse, query inflection and direct response, imperative or persuasive inflections, expressions of emotion, intimidation, negation, and even ritual. These vocalizations exhibit characteristics that are conventional, automatized, arbitrary, and creative, all properties of human language. And here I'd like to point out one of them, especially the concept of negation. It's something that animals cannot do. Even animals that we usually say have language, like whales, things like this. We don't know for sure, okay? But most animals we know they're not capable of negation. Okay? What that would be is An example would be a dog can tell you, woof, and that might have some meaning for a dog. It might have some arbitrary meaning for a dog. Give me food or something. But a dog is incapable of going, not, woof. Right? This is what we mean by negation. Only humans are capable of it. Okay? And these guys, we believe. Okay. I have been asked numerous times how I know that it's not just gibberish or mimicry. In the first place, gibberish implies language. It may be unintelligible, but it requires language ability to do it. We're getting a little bit into psycholinguistics here, but in order to generate random phonemes that have no meaning, one must first understand the arbitrary nature of morphemes and that they have linguistic meaning. One might think that a chimpanzee could produce gibberish, but he could not, since he has no comprehension that he was doing it. That's, of course, besides the fact that apes cannot articulate phonemes the way we do. They simply do not have the apparatus to do it. Neither is it mimicry, since the speech is so automatized and creative. And since the humans are giving the creatures nothing to mimic. Rather, what we do find on the tapes are the humans attempting to mimic the creatures. And this, of course, makes me wonder what the creatures might be thinking about us. In brief, there are so many characteristics of human language evident in the tapes that we must assume that even those elements that cannot yet be known, such as grammatical categories, are also present in this language. Finally, to my third conclusion, that the tapes could not have been faked. Okay. While serving as a cryptolinguist working with naval intelligence, I was trained in every form of deceptive voice communication imaginable, including the slowing down of tape, the speeding up of tape, the human voice, okay, modulation of tone and pitch, playing tapes backwards, and a distortion of every kind. None of these techniques are evident here. I was a Russian analyst, so I was trained in all of the Soviet tactics of deception. Soviets were the best at what they did, but even their best effort could not have produced these vocalizations. And certainly, no one could have done it in 1974. Okay. So, at this juncture, for anyone to claim that these vocalizations were faked, he would have to argue that a secret cabal comprised of several ingenious conspirators was so determined to deceive the world that they invented their own language, modulated their vocalizations to frequencies above and below the ability of humans, harassed a small group of hunters over a period of several weeks, in successive years, and threw in numerous cognate words and expressions to boot. With this new evidence, it is now more reasonable to defend the existence of an undocumented creature than it is to believe in such a conspiracy. Well, speaking of the evidence, and since I'm not a scientist, I was struggling with the question of what exactly was the nature of the evidence I had. Several months ago, I happened to be visiting my daughter, who is in postgraduate studies at Cal State Berkeley. While there, I arranged a meeting with philosophy professor Dr. Sherilyn Rausch, a leading expert in the nature of evidence and the author of a recent book called Tracking Truth, Knowledge, Evidence, and Science. Dr. Rausch also spoke at the opening of a recent exhibit of Dr. Kranz's work at the Hearst Museum on campus. After listening to the samplings of the tapes and looking over my transcription notes, she expressed the opinion that what I had was valid observational data that should be recognized by science as long as I included the necessary contrast controls in my study. And this, of course, we are doing. Now to get to Ron's persistent question. Can we know what they were trying to say to us? And for this, I will turn to the eminent philosopher and linguist, the late Dr. Willard Quine, who 50 years ago anticipated the discovery of an entirely alien language. Although I do not believe that he anticipated that it would be the language of Bigfoot. Dr. Quine calls our efforts to understand such a language radical translation, and introduces the indeterminacy of translation thesis. In it, he argues that the meaning of any word cannot be known in and of itself, since the meaning of the word can change each and every time the word is spoken, depending on the context and the meaning in the mind of the speaker. Without the ability to confirm the meaning of a word as intended by the speaker, we cannot definitively translate it. We can, however, begin the process until confirmation of meanings can be achieved. Dr. Quine gives us several steps to follow, and we begin with what is called the principle of charity. This principle states that we must assume that the speakers are not contradicting themselves, that they have a grammar, and they therefore utilize negation. There's a negation again. Okay? We must begin in radical translation by determining their words for yes and no. And we believe that we may have done that. So in the end, this is what we're faced with, perhaps for the first time in history. The radical translation of an entirely unknown language, with no roots to go by. Okay? And so I have had to make the point to Ron that the most important aspect of this discovery is not to know what each of their words mean, but simply to know that they are speaking a language, and that they have tried to speak to us. What are the implications of what we have discovered? Well, for me, this is proof that Bigfoot exists. Now, after all, I have heard his language. Okay? And short of a corpse, what greater proof is there for the existence of any creature than to have discovered his language? What we have here is akin to intercepting a message from deep in outer space that exhibited all of these same characteristics of human language. Would we still continue to deny the existence of beings who sent the message? Probably, I suppose, somewhat. Right? I have been asked many times in the last year, I can't tell you how many times, because of this discovery, to make further judgments as to the nature of this creature. This makes him human. I have heard from numerous sources. But I would be stepping outside my field of expertise if I attempted to place Bigfoot into one genus or another. Is he ape? Is he human? Or something in between? I wouldn't know where to begin. I will leave that an enviable task to the biologists and anthropologists. But what I can state unequivocally is that the creatures on these tapes have and use language, by the human definition of language. That he is therefore an intelligent and thinking being. And if we use the same standards to define him that we use to define ourselves, he is self-aware. He is sentient. And dare I say it, sapient? Now that alone does not necessarily make him human. Of course not. But it separates him from the animals. The argument could be made that he does not use tools, or that he doesn't live in extended societies, but he may simply have no use for tools. However, he certainly participates in enough social interaction to facilitate language. Because of this, and it's taken me a while to come to this point, it has become a conviction of mine that we should not attempt to capture Bigfoot or collect him as a specimen, but rather contact is the best and only right way to discover him to science, I believe. I don't know that footprints or hair samples or even DNA will ever be enough. And will we ever have anything better than Patterson-Gimlin? So, in the end, I have to believe that documented contact is our best hope. Just as we would document the existence of any newly discovered tribal people. Thank you for having me. Questions? Yes, I didn't answer your question, did I?
That's all right. You were talking about, you have a basis for the dialect and a rough interpretation, and use that alphabet that you've come up with. Now, what about, like, if you have a Bigfoot, and I know some of us have heard the recordings of, like, down in Louisiana, they almost seem to have a French accent or a annotation of that.
Of course that
So
would.
could you use that with that? Do you think it'd compare, or would it be like Russian and English? I mean,
We have to assume that language for Bigfoot would be the same as human language. And language is a living thing. It changes and grows and evolves. And with isolation, it becomes different. So we have to assume that the Bigfoots in Louisiana probably speak with a Cajun accent. I don't know. But it would certainly be different than what's heard up in the middle of Canada somewhere. Sure. Sure they would.
but would the basis, would the roots be the same? Like I know,
Yeah, there would be roots. There would be roots. And again, and I can touch on the idea of cognates too. If when European man first came to this continent, okay, if Bigfoot would naturally, if Bigfoot had a language that they learned while observing man, or had their own language as well as some input from the local human population, then they would have spoken certain certain forms of a native language, right? Well, and if that was the case, then they would certainly have, as the native languages have died out in America, they would have made the same transition that we humans have to a European language. So it would be natural that they would have cognates from English as well. Yes, sir.
Have you made your alphabet available to people, or do you plan to make it available?
Yeah, we're gonna, yes, definitely we'll make it available. Yes. Yes.
What do you think about DW's story about his mimicking the name of his grandson?
Oh.
Give them your own experience.
Huh?
Give them your experience.
Let me say this.
Go ahead.
This happened, what he's about to tell you happened within just a few weeks of what happened to me. And we didn't even know about each other's experience. And we both told Randy about it. That's when Randy told us that, this happened the same way both ways.
This last summer, me and Ron Moorhead made an attempt to go back up to the original hunting camp. And to do what I had been doing out in the field, and that to take the transcripts up there and just to simply to to read from the transcripts out in the forest, in the woods. And again, we got down in the horse camp. I got a couple of the acknowledgement grunts. We were never able to make it up to the top, which, by the way, is another reason that I can definitively say this place is remote, and there wouldn't be. There's no way that a group of tricksters would try to find their way up there to trick these hunters into thinking that they were Sasquatches. Anyway, the second morning we were there, we had come down from the mountain. We had experienced some bad trouble where Ron was almost killed. And he was recovering in the tent, so early the next morning, couldn't move. He had a couple of busted ribs, what we thought was a broken arm. And I was getting up to go check on the horses. Still dark, but we'd heard some commotion with the horses and walking around, some clomping around the tent and even in the horse trailer, right? So we thought one of the horses was loose. Well, this side point, but later on I got up and found out that there were no horses loose. But as I was getting up and putting my boots on, I was talking to Ron right there. From the edge of the forest, probably from here to that back wall, I heard my name called. It was just almost in a high-pitched, almost a female voice. It would have been a husky female, but it was like, Scott, just like that. And me and Ron looked at each other, and we really were expecting his daughter, Rhonda, to come up in a couple days. But, so I said, is that Rhonda? He said, I don't know, did you see her car? And we looked at it, it was still dark, there were no headlights, there were no cars. I got up, put my boots on, I went out, there was absolutely nothing. But from that far away at the edge of the forest, I heard my name called. And then, of course, me and Ron, you tried to make sense of that, and we realized that the day before, when we were having so much trouble up on the mountain, all day long he was shouting my name as I was shouting his. We had gotten separated. The horses ran down the mountain 3 times, and he had to chase them. It was a mess. But in any case, throughout this whole day, I'm shouting, Ron! And he's shouting, stop! So it would have been a perfect time for the creatures to have learned our names. They certainly would have known what those words meant to us. That's the first time I've ever told that story in public. Yes, sir.
Sounds to me that like you picked up some phrases and words off that tape. Did you, and it sounds like the creatures were deciding where they were to come in and eat. Did you ever pick up anything off that? Why they didn't come in?
They did. But not while they did come in, and they took everything that had been left out for them, but not until the mountain men or the cowboys, as we call them, had gone to bed, had gone into their little lean-to cabin that they have up there. But they did come in, and they came in numerous times over the years. Numerous times they would come in, and for some reason, those creatures did not have a problem letting them know that letting the humans know that they were there. And in fact, in a couple of instances, the next morning, the hunters would come back from going out on a hunting expedition and come back, and they would find a little pile of pine cones left right next to their fire pit, knowing that the humans used pine cones to start their fire. And it was almost like it was an exchange for the food that the hunters had left out for them. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
A lot of the tribal legends say that mountain men are scary, and you down on the mountains and trade with the Indians, and the Indians can communicate with them, and they with the mountain men. It's possible that the hairy men could have picked up the language from the Indians, isn't it? It's
probable that they would have learn the Indian language just through observation. Now, we have to assume that the Sasquatch acquired language the same way that we did, possibly 100, 200,000 years ago. That's what we have to believe. It doesn't seem, language is not like that to where it's something you can go and learn as a technique. You have to have, there's like a switch in the brain that has to turn over. And we think that that had to have happened with Sasquatch at some time in the distant past. So Sasquatch would have had his own language, but also would have acquired some cognatic words and expressions from the native populations. So, just to answer your question, I don't think it would have been a thing where the Indians taught the Sasquatch how to speak. I think it would have happened sort of coincidentally. It's pretty much the same time. Yes, ma'am?
How do you think Sasquatch language would be?
We can't even decide that for humans. There's some archaeologists that say that this switch was turned on about 50,000 years ago. Others, archaeologists and as well as most linguists, believe that language came to us, developed with us as a species, which would have been 100 to 200,000 years ago. So that's still really up in the air. Yes?
When you're showing those tracings, the amplitude or baseline for the creatures versus the humans is much greater. What was the distance of the microphone from each group?
The distance of the microphone was placed at the same place both times. It's just in the first, when Al Berry did his recording, the creatures were much closer. And in the Moorhead tape, again, because Ron had wanted to duplicate what Al Berry had done, he put the microphone in the same place. And during the sequence of the Moorhead tape, you can hear the creatures actually coming closer. But they never do quite get as close as in the Berry tape. In the Berry tape, it sounds like it's right here. It's very, very loud and clear. Yes, sir?
You ever read the Robert Austin tale? Robert Austin?
Yes, I have.
That kind of collaborates with it.
Absolutely. As well as, and this is one of the first things I found out, even before I ever found Ron. I started reading all of these eyewitness reports. Some of them very old, right? But dozens of them that very clearly said they were mumbling in some sort of Greek language or Indian language or some sort of Russian language. You find dozens and dozens of those. Yes, ma'am?
You said in your transcriptions that there may be some evidence for ritual. What was that?
There's one, ritual is one of the functions for language. Okay, and it's one of the reasons that we have language, amongst about a dozen other things. But there's one spot in the Moorhead tape where there's a female that articulates a word or like a call, and the male responds to her, and it seems to be a ritualistic exchange. What I mean by ritualistic, as opposed to having morphology or a meaning, is that it would have a ritualistic meaning rather than a linguistic meaning. She goes, the female several times goes, it's like this, and even though it's articulated the way words are, we don't think it has a linguistic meaning in that way. And the male very quickly and ritualistically responds, wako. She goes again, she goes, wako. He goes, wako. Any more questions? I'll be willing to talk to anybody and answer any other further questions, so thank you very much.
Join the Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. for the Bigfoot Field Guide radio show. For more information, go to the Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center's website at www.mid-americabigfoot.com. Listen to the hosts talk about everything Bigfoot, from behaviors to current research being conducted in the field. It's all there, and also check out the archives at www.talkshoe.com/tc/10072, and tell them that Bigfoot sent you. See ya there.